Lando Norris may just have one hand on the championship trophy, and with just 2 rounds to go, his 24-point lead might just be too big for Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen to make up. But how did we get here? Let's walk through the 2025 season and talk about how Lando has overcome his doubters and critics and how he's ended up on the doorstep of Formula One immortality. Let's talk. Coming into the season, Lando was the bookies' favourite for the championship thanks to his performances in the back end of the 2024 season, although he didn't have everyone convinced of his ability to win the title. Over the course of his career, Lando has been criticised for his supposedly weak mentality and how he might not have the mental fortitude of a champion, something the likes of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton have shown to have. A major criticism of Lando was just how self-critical he can be on himself, where it seemed a minor mistake or moment during a weekend could entirely dictate his performance and potentially have a lasting effect on his driving in future races. He has openly admitted over the years that he has had his struggles with what the media and fans say and how that can affect his performances, but in the most recent run of races, Lando has seemingly shown a new mindset of being able to block out all the noise and focus solely on the task at hand. And this has clearly paid its dividends. At the beginning of the season, Lando's qualifying woes were a major talking point, as he had a string of races such as Bahrain and Saudi Arabia where he would make a costly mistake on his Q3 push laps. All whilst his teammate Oscar Piastri was putting his car on the front row and converting these into a race win on the Sunday. He openly spoke about how he felt he was overdriving the car when the crucial laps of Q3 would come along, and how he felt he was letting the moment get to him, causing him to make costly mistakes. But as the season has gone on, he has managed to become much more consistent in his qualifying performances, and as the heat has turned up on the title fight, he has delivered. Over the 8 qualifying sessions since the summer break, Lando has had an average qualifying position of 2.6, which is the best out of every driver on the grid. Although Max has the same amount of pole positions in that same period of time, his P16 Brazil dropped his average dramatically. Since his DNF in Zandvoort, where he fell 34 points behind Oscar, Lando has almost driven with a greater level of freedom and confidence, and the results have shown that. He's managed the pressure of Max Verstappen making a charge back into the title fight by making sure that he's getting the most out of the car every single weekend. The only exception in that case being Azerbaijan, which has allowed him to take advantage of the fact that Oscar has had a slump in form over the previous 7 races, letting his firm grip of the championship slip. Lando has also improved on his race starts, where in recent seasons he was criticised for consistently losing positions going into turn 1, most notably when he was starting on pole. This season, Lando has managed to convert all but 2 of his pole positions into race wins, the exceptions being his pole in Spa, a track notoriously known for its challenge of keeping pole position down the Camel Straight, and Las Vegas where he made an error going into turn 1 defending against Max. His 2 most recent wins in Mexico and Brazil came with a slightly different pressure than his previous ones, and that pressure is the expectation to convert and extend a championship lead. During these 2 races, Lando qualified on pole whilst Oscar had been off the pace, qualifying P8 and P4. And in both of these races, Lando has managed the pressure perfectly and come out with 2 victories and a 30-point swing in his favour. I think a great example of this new mindset from Lando is how he handled Brazil this year compared to last year. Last season, he was chasing down Max and qualified on pole, with Max set to start in P17, which could have been a major points gain for him. However, a mix of poor conditions, unfortunate timing on a safety car, and a mistake behind that very safety car saw him finish down in P6, with Max putting on one of the greatest performances of all time by coming back to win by 20 seconds. It was a prime example of how he just wasn't ready for the pressures and spotlight that came along with being in the title fight. And on the other hand, you have 2025, where he finished on top in every single competitive session over the weekend and grew his lead in the championship from 1 point to 24 in the span of 1 weekend. Beyond the shift in his mentality, for the most part this season his results have been incredible. Over the 22 races we've had so far, Lando has been on the podium 17 times, managing to stand on the top step 7 times out of those podiums, following up with 2 sprint wins out of the possible 5 so far. The most impressive stat out of all of this is that when he has finished a race, there has only been 3 times where he hasn't finished on the podium. These results being his P4 in Saudi Arabia, after a crash early in Q3 stopped him from qualifying near the front, his P7 in Baku, finishing where he qualified after a very difficult weekend, and most notably Las Vegas, where he did manage to finish P2 on track but was later disqualified for too much wear on his skid plate. This level of consistency that Lando has shown has been nothing but remarkable, and even when he had his struggles in Q3 earlier this season, more often than not he would continue to fight back through the field to finish on the podium and maximise as much as he could from a recovery drive. His run from Miami through to Hungary saw him failing to finish any lower than P2 in that 9-race span, with his DNF in Canada being the only exception. Picking up 4 wins during these 9 races allowed him to stay within touching distance of Oscar and slowly reel him in all the way until the summer break, where the pair would head to Zandvoort with just 9 points separating them. But the Netherlands wouldn't be his friend this time around. Qualifying P2 behind Oscar by just 12 milliseconds, Lando would stay on the tail of his teammate for the entirety of the race until tragedy struck on lap 65, where an oil leak would cause a complete engine failure, leading him to have to retire from the race in cruel fashion with just 7 laps remaining. Lando watched his teammate cruise to a victory from the sidelines and scamper away with a 34-point lead. Whatever way he felt about that weekend, he didn't let it affect him longer than it needed to, as since that race, he has been on the podium in 5 of the last 7 races, including 2 more wins in that time. This results in an average finishing position of 4.5 over the course of the season, but that statistic doesn't do him justice. If we take into consideration the circumstances surrounding his 2 DNFs and the disqualification, and replace them with where he was when he finished or was on track at the time, his average is genuinely otherworldly. Because of how late on these DNFs and disqualifications happened, we are able to get an accurate representation of where he may have finished. In Canada, he was P5 when he went for an ambitious move on his teammate, and P2 in both Zandvoort and Las Vegas. So adding these into his race results, he has an average race finishing position of 2.3 over the course of the season. Of course, this is made slightly easier when the team is able to provide its drivers with a car as dominant to the rest of the field as McLaren have done, but we have also seen in recent years that that doesn't automatically mean that both drivers will extract the most out of the car every weekend. Red Bull being the perfect example of that, with the contrast in performance between Max and Checo. With that in mind, Lando has done an outstanding job at being able to consistently get on the podium and even pip his teammate to wins when he hasn't been the one starting on pole position. I think thanks to the recent revival of Max's title charge with his unbelievable form lately, Lando is only now starting to get the recognition he has rightly deserved. His early season struggles had painted the rest of his season with the same brush, meaning his incredible run of consistency was overlooked and potentially downplayed at times. So how is he compared to his teammate directly, and how has this season ebbed and flowed for both drivers? Taking a deep dive into the stats will actually surprise you. Let's start with the qualifying head-to-heads. Now, over the course of the season, this gap has been insanely close between the two, with the advantage swinging back and forth. I've taken the most comparative qualifying lap so it's as accurate as it can be, and the delta between the two is 0.0063 in favour of Lando, with the actual head-to-head battle also being advantaged Lando, beating Oscar 12-10. Lando has an average qualifying position of 3.1, which is the exact same as his teammate, showing just how little there has been between them in this department. However, between round 5 in Saudi Arabia and round 20 in Mexico, Lando has been trailing his teammate in all qualifying metrics, with his most recent spell of form putting him in the lead. Oscar has only managed to outqualify Lando twice since the summer break, and the delta has been flipped in Lando's favour thanks to his 0.580 gap to Oscar in Mexico and 0.577 gap taken from the most comparable lap between the pair in Vegas. With how important qualifying has become this season, this spell of form has been crucial in the championship turnaround. But what about race days? Considering the advantage McLaren have had for most of this season, it's no shock that they've been battling at the sharp end this year, but it's slightly more one-sided on a Sunday than you'd think. In the 18 races where both drivers have finished, Lando leads his teammate 12-6. But that's not just where the stat finishes. Surprisingly, in races where Oscar has not finished on the top step of the podium and Lando has managed to finish the race, Oscar has not beaten Lando at any point this season. However, I feel this does speak more to the clear advantage of the McLaren, as there was a consistent period of the season where they would finish 1-2 well ahead of the grid. But coming back to the duo, if we look at the race results, since his DNF in Canada, unbelievably, Lando has only failed to finish ahead of his teammate twice in that 12 race period. He hasn't finished behind Oscar since his DNF in Zandvoort, and if we include the sprint results in those 7 races, he has had a monstrous 58 points gained in the championship battle. And speaking of sprint races, this is where the overall advantage still lies in Oscar's favour, where he holds a 3-2 lead over the 5 sprint qualifying sessions with a .128 delta, with the pair tied at 2-all during the sprint races, with Austin not taken into account thanks to them both DNFing on lap 1. If we dive back into the stats again, you'll notice that since Austria, Lando's performances over both qualifying and the races have been significantly more consistent and much better than his teammate. This is thanks to a change that McLaren brought strictly to his car from that weekend onwards to help him feel more comfortable in the car due to his early season struggles, at least in comparison to Oscar. His average finishing position during that 12 race stint has been 1.9. That's with excluding Zandvoort and Vegas, where it would rise to 5.1 with those results included if they were listed as a P20 finish. So what does Lando need to do to get this championship over the line? Sitting on top on 390 points, Lando has amassed a 24-point lead with just 2 weekends left. Within scenarios where all 3 drivers finish each race, here is what they need to do to win the title. To start with, the championship can no longer be won during the sprint in Qatar thanks to the gap being cut down drastically. Now, for Lando to guarantee the championship at the finish line in Abu Dhabi, all he has to do is finish P3 in both of the upcoming races and a minimum of P4 in the sprint race. As even if Oscar or Max finished P1 in every event, with those results, Lando would still win the title by 1 singular point in Abu Dhabi. The earliest he can win it is by outscoring both Max and Oscar by 2 points in Qatar, but as we've learned, things are never that simple in Formula 1. But what if Lando finishes behind his title rivals for the remainder of the season? In that case, he would need to ensure that he finishes within 2 positions of both drivers regardless of where they finish to secure the title. So long as he isn't outscored by more than 12 points per weekend, he will walk away as the champion. In the event that either Max or Oscar do overthrow Lando's lead, how could they do it? Firstly, if one of them wins both races and the sprint and Lando finishes off the podium, they will win the title. If either driver wins both remaining races and manages to finish level on points with Lando, they would win the title on countback of wins, with Oscar having 9 wins and Max having 8 compared to Lando's 7. Another scenario is that if they finish in any podium position without winning, they must finish at least 5 positions ahead of Lando to take the championship. The final scenario is the reverse of one for Lando, in which they don't outscore Lando in Qatar, they will lose the championship prior to Abu Dhabi. Going off of the recent form of all 3 drivers, granted no more disqualifications or DNFs, the 24-point gap may just be too big to overcome, especially when you take into consideration that each of them will potentially be taking points off each other. So in what has been a grueling, challenging and long drawn out championship fight, Lando currently has one hand on the championship trophy. His undoubted pace and ability has been on full display from start to finish. He has managed the scrutiny, struggles and sheer weight of expectation of being a championship contender brilliantly. From the lows of Zandvoort and Vegas to the highs of Silverstone and Monaco, he's managed to come out of all of it just a few steps away from achieving the ultimate goal, now just 2 more weekends from etching his name into Formula 1 immortality forever, as a Formula 1 world champion.